The demolition crew stood frozen as Marcus Hayes walked past them toward his backyard pool, sledgehammer in hand. His neighbors had spent months trying to force him out, filing complaint after complaint, threatening lawsuits over property lines and safety violations. They wanted his pool gone so badly they'd made his life hell. Fine, he'd give them exactly what they wanted. But as the first blow cracked the concrete and Fire Chief Rodriguez pulled up with 3 trucks and a grateful smile, the Homeowners Association president went pale. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Marcus Hayes stared at the certified letter in his hands, the 3rd one this month. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association logo glared back at him in pristine navy blue, as cold and unwelcoming as the people who'd sent it. Through his kitchen window, he could see his daughter Emma's pool floaties still bobbing in the crystal-clear water, a splash of color against the manicured lawns that stretched toward the McMansions beyond. Final notice of violation, he read aloud, his voice carrying the weight of 12 years in this neighborhood. Property Code 847B. Unauthorized permanent structure exceeding setback requirements. You have 14 days to remedy this violation or face legal action and potential liens against your property. The pool had been there when he bought the house, the same pool where Emma had learned to swim, where she'd celebrated her birthdays, where she'd spent countless summer afternoons with friends who no longer came around since the neighborhood had evolved. Marcus set the letter on his granite countertop, the same counters he'd installed himself when money was tighter and sweat equity meant more than cutting checks. Everything about this house told the story of a man who'd built his life one careful decision at a time. The hardwood floors he'd refinished by hand, the crown molding he'd measured and cut and installed during weekends while Emma napped, the garden beds where his late wife Sarah had planted roses that still bloomed every spring. Dad. Emma's voice drifted from the living room where she was sprawled on the couch, supposedly doing homework, but clearly scrolling through her phone. At 16, she had Sarah's eyes and Marcus's stubborn streak, though lately the stubbornness had been directed at him more often than not. Yeah, sweetheart, Mrs. Patterson is outside again. She's got that clipboard. Marcus looked through the front window and saw Diane Patterson standing on the sidewalk, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight. She wore her usual uniform of yoga pants and a designer t-shirt that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. The clipboard was never a good sign. He opened the front door before she could ring the bell. Diane. Marcus. Her smile was the kind reserved for unpleasant but necessary conversations. I trust you received the final notice. I did. I also remember when you moved in 5 years ago and told me what a charming neighborhood feel this place had. Funny how charm becomes a code violation when property values hit a certain number. Diane's smile tightened. This isn't personal, Marcus. It's about maintaining standards. The pool is 3 feet closer to the property line than current regulations allow. We've been patient, but the city inspector made it very clear that the city inspector, who happens to be married to your sister, that's irrelevant. The measurements are the measurements. Marcus stepped onto his porch, closing the door behind him. Over Diane's shoulder, he could see other neighbors beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by the familiar drama like moths to flame, the Hendersons from across the street. Old Mr. Kim from the corner house, who'd lived here longer than anyone and had probably seen this same dance play out with other families over the years. You want to know what's irrelevant, Diane? The fact that this pool was permitted and inspected 12 years ago, the fact that your precious association has grandfathering clauses for structures that predate the current codes, the fact that you and your friends have been trying to push out everyone who doesn't fit your vision of what this neighborhood should look like. Now you're being dramatic, am I? The Johnsons got cited for their garden gnomes. The Martinezes got cited for parking their work truck in their own driveway. And somehow, miraculously, every single violation has come after families like mine became inconvenient reminders that this used to be a place where regular people could afford to live. Diane's clipboard crackled as her grip tightened. The association has a responsibility to all residents to maintain property values. Your ... situation has been more than accommodating considering the circumstances. The circumstances, as if Sarah's death 3 years ago was some kind of lifestyle choice that reflected poorly on the neighborhood's image. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said, his voice steady, but carrying an edge that made Diane take a half step back. I'm going to give you exactly what you want. The pool's going to be gone. Diane blinked, clearly caught off guard by his capitulation. Well, that's good. The association appreciates your cooperation, but I'm going to do it my way, on my timeline. And Diane. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. When this is all over, you're going to wish you'd left well enough alone. He turned and walked back into his house, leaving Diane standing on the sidewalk with her clipboard and her confusion. Through the window, he watched her hurry back to her house, already pulling out her phone to spread the news of her victory. Emma appeared at his elbow. Dad, what did you mean about doing it your way? Marcus looked at his daughter, then out at the pool where she'd spent so many happy hours. The water was perfectly clear, the pH balanced, the equipment humming quietly in the pump house he'd built and maintained for over a decade. It was a good pool. It deserved better than being torn out to satisfy the aesthetic preferences of people who measured their self-worth in property values and HOA compliance. I've got some phone calls to make, he said, starting with Chief Rodriguez at the fire department. Emma frowned. The fire department? Dad, what are you planning? Marcus smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt genuine. Justice, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war. As evening approached, Marcus sat on his back deck with his laptop and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The research had taken longer than expected, but the plan was solid. Fire departments across the state regularly used residential pools for training exercises, rescue scenarios, emergency response drills, equipment testing. The liability was manageable, the benefit to the community was significant, and the optics were perfect. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother Jake. Heard through the grapevine that you caved to the HOA. That doesn't sound like you. Marcus typed back. Who said anything about caving? The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, should I be worried? Only if you're on the HOA board. Dude, what are you planning? Marcus looked out at his pool. Gleaming under the landscape lighting he'd installed himself, tomorrow he'd start making calls. By the end of the week, Chief Rodriguez would understand exactly what Marcus was offering. By the end of the month, the entire neighborhood would understand what they'd really lost. He typed one more message. To Jake, sometimes the best revenge is giving people exactly what they asked for. Then he went inside to start drafting the press release. Chief Rodriguez answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 23 years running toward emergencies while everyone else ran away. Willowbrook Fire Department, Rodriguez speaking. Chief, this is Marcus Hayes. I live over on Maple Ridge Drive. We met at Emma's school fundraiser last year. I'm the one who donated the welding services for the auction. Marcus? Sure. How's Emma doing? She was quite the little entrepreneur at that event. She's good. Thanks for asking. Chief, I'm calling because I have a proposition that might interest the department. I understand you folks sometimes use residential pools for training exercises. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. We do, depending on the situation, water rescue training, equipment testing, that sort of thing. It's always a challenge finding suitable locations. Most pool owners aren't exactly thrilled about having a bunch of firefighters trampling through their backyards. Marcus smiled, settling into his desk chair. I'm in a situation where I need to have my pool removed, and before I call in a demolition crew, I thought I'd see if it might be useful to the department. That's a shame residential pools are perfect for training scenarios, much more realistic than the concrete practice. Pools at the academy. What's the timeline? The HOA gave me 14 days to start remediation, but they didn't specify what kind of remediation. If the fire department wanted to use it for training exercises over the next few months before removal, addressing their concerns about safety, Rodriguez chuckled. You're dealing with HOA drama, I take it? Something like that? The point is, you'd have access to a fully functional residential pool for as long as you need it. Water rescue scenarios, night training, equipment testing, whatever, would be most beneficial for your crews. This is actually perfect timing, Marcus. We've got 3 new recruits starting next month, and our usual training facility is booked solid through the summer. When could we take a look? How about tomorrow morning, say 10 o'clock? I'll be there, and Marcus. This kind of community partnership, it's exactly what we need more of. After hanging up, Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked out at the pool through his office window. The underwater lights had kicked on automatically, turning the water into a glowing rectangle of blue that reflected against the surrounding trees. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like he was playing offense instead of defense. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Diane Patterson. The HOA board has decided to meet tomorrow night to discuss your compliance timeline, 7 p.m. at the community center. Violation. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'll be there, so will my attorney. He didn't have an attorney yet, but he would by tomorrow night. 3 doors down, Diane Patterson paced her marble-floored kitchen while her husband Richard scrolled through his tablet, occasionally making non-committal sounds that she'd learned meant he was paying just enough attention to avoid an argument. He's planning something, she said for the 3rd time. You should have seen his face, Richard. He wasn't defeated. He was calculating. Maybe he's just tired of fighting. You've been pretty relentless with the violations. Diane stopped, pacing, relentless. I've been protecting our property values. Do you know what happens when one house starts dragging down the neighborhood? When standards slip? We'll end up like Oakwood Heights half the houses, with broken cars in the driveways and chain-link fences. Richard looked up from his tablet. Marcus isn't exactly living in a broken-down shack. Diane, his house is immaculate. His yard is perfect. The only issue is that his pool is 3 feet closer to the property line than our current regulations allow. Regulations exist for a reason. Regulations that were changed 2 years ago specifically to target pools like his. The silence that followed was loaded with 3 years of marriage to a woman. Richard returned to his tablet, but Diane could see the tension in his shoulders. He'd never supported her HOA crusade, but he'd never actively opposed it either until now. Whose side are you on? She asked quietly. I'm on the side of not making enemies of our neighbors over technicalities. This isn't about technicalities. It's about maintaining the character of our neighborhood. No, Diane, it's about you not liking Marcus because he reminds you that regular people used to be able to afford houses here, and it's about you not liking that he didn't fall apart after Sarah died, the way you expected him to. Diane's face flushed. That's a horrible thing to say, but it's true, isn't it? Move somewhere more appropriate for a single father. But he stayed, and he kept his house perfect, and his daughter kept thriving. Richard stood up, tucking his tablet under his arm. Whatever Marcus is planning, maybe you should consider that he might not be the villain in this story. Dava made Marcus remember why he'd fallen in love with this neighborhood in the first place. He was drinking coffee on his back deck when Chief Rodriguez pulled up in a white SUV marked with the fire department logo. He walked around the pool slowly, occasionally kneeling to examine the deck or the equipment housing. This is beautiful work, he said finally. You maintain this yourself, every bit of it. Chemical balance, equipment maintenance, cleaning. I've got 12 years of logs if you want to see them. Mind if I ask why you're getting rid of it? Marcus handed him a copy of the HOA violation notice. Rodriguez read it twice, his expression growing increasingly incredulous. 3 feet. They're forcing you to tear out a 12-year-old pool because it's 3 feet closer to the property line than they'd prefer. That's about the size of it. Rodriguez folded the letter and handed it back. Over 2 decades, I've seen house fires, car accidents, medical emergencies, water rescues, you name it. A single emergency caused by a pool being 3 feet closer to a property line than someone thought it should be. The HOA board might disagree with you. The HOA board doesn't have to fish teenagers out of retention ponds because they don't have access to proper swimming facilities. They don't have to respond to water emergencies with crews who've never trained in realistic residential scenarios. Rodriguez looked around the backyard, taking in the mature landscaping, the careful maintenance, the obvious pride of ownership. This is exactly what we need for training. Natural environment, realistic access challenges, proper depth for rescue scenarios. So, we have a deal. We have a deal. I'll have our attorney draw up a training facility use agreement. We'll run exercises here twice a week for the next 3 months, then help you with removal when you're ready. In the meantime, you're in full compliance with your HOA timeline here, addressing their safety concerns by having the fire department. actively using the space for emergency preparedness he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Chief, there's one more thing. Would it be possible for these training exercises to be open to the public? You know, community education about water safety?" Rodriguez grinned. "Marcus, I think you and I are going to get along just fine." That evening, Marcus sat in the Willowbrook Community Center, facing a semicircle of HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Diane Patterson sat at the center of the group, her clipboard replaced by a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "Mr. Hayes," she began in her most officious tone, "the board has reviewed your violation status, and actually," Marcus interrupted, "I'd like to submit documentation showing that I'm in full compliance with the remediation timeline." The board members exchanged glances. Diane's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion. Marcus handed her a copy of the Fire Department Training Facility Agreement, countersigned by Chief Rodriguez and the city's legal department. "As of this morning, my pool has been designated as an active emergency services training facility. The Willowbrook Fire Department will be conducting water rescue training, emergency response exercises, and community safety education programs on my property for the next 3 months." Diane's face went through several color changes as she read the document. This ... This doesn't solve the setback violation. Actually, it does. Municipal emergency services facilities are exempt from HOA architectural restrictions under State Code 847.3b. The pool isn't just a residential amenity anymore, it's a public safety asset. The silence in the room was deafening. When the training program concludes, the fire department has agreed to assist with removal and donation of the salvageable mat. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching 3 fire trucks navigate the narrow streets of Willowbrook Heights. The lead truck had to back up twice to avoid the Hendersons' perfectly manicured hedge that jutted 6 inches into the street. A violation that had somehow never made it onto Diane Patterson's clipboard. By 9:45 a.m., Marcus's backyard had been transformed into a staging area that looked like something from a disaster movie. Firefighters in full gear moved with practiced efficiency, setting up equipment, testing communications, briefing the 3 recruits who would be the focus of today's training. Chief Rodriguez stood in the center of it all, radiating the calm authority of someone who'd seen every emergency imaginable. What Marcus hadn't expected was the crowd. Word had spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church social. Families with children pressed against the fence line, drawn by the spectacle of emergency vehicles and professional rescuers. Old Mr. Kim had set up a lawn chair in his driveway to get a better view. Even some of the HOA board members lingered at the edges of their properties, trying to look disapproving while obviously fascinated by the proceedings. Mr. Hayes, a woman with a Channel 7 news microphone, appeared at his elbow. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. We spoke on the phone about covering the training program. Of course, thanks for coming out." Rebecca's cameraman was already filming the setup, capturing footage of firefighters in action against the backdrop of suburban perfection. This is exactly the kind of positive community story we love to feature. "How did you come up with the idea?" Marcus chose his words carefully. Sometimes, the best way to solve a problem is to find a solution that benefits everyone. The neighborhood was concerned about safety. The fire department needed realistic training facilities. Seemed like a natural partnership, and this will be ongoing for the next 3 months. Then the pool will be professionally removed, and the materials donated to community organizations. What Marcus didn't say was that he'd already been contacted by 2 other fire departments in neighboring counties, both interested in similar training partnerships. What he also didn't mention was the call he'd received from the state fire marshal's office, asking if the program might serve as a pilot for statewide implementation. At exactly 10 a.m., Chief Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air with the authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death situations. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first Community Water Rescue Training Exercise. What you're about to see is real emergency response training that could save lives in our community." The scenario was simple but terrifying in its realism. A teenage victim had fallen through thin ice represented by foam. Padding floated on the pool surface and was suffering from hypothermia and potential drowning. The rescue team had to navigate obstacles, coordinate multiple responders, and execute a technical water rescue while maintaining safety protocols. Marcus found himself holding his breath as recruit Johnson, a 22-year-old former college swimmer, slipped into the cold water in full gear. The weight of his equipment and the shock of the temperature created immediate challenges that no training pool could replicate. His movements were clumsy at first, then more controlled as training took over. "Time," Rodriguez called out. 4 minutes, 30 seconds from initial contact to victim secured. That's 30 seconds faster than academy standards, but in real conditions, hypothermia sets in after 2 to 3 minutes. "Johnson, talk me through what went wrong." The debrief was clinical, professional, and absolutely riveting. The crowd of neighbors listened as Rodriguez broke down every second of the rescue, explaining how different environmental factors, water temperature, lighting conditions, access angles, affected response times, and success rates. "Emergency," Rodriguez concluded, "those 30 seconds could mean the difference between a successful rescue and a recovery operation. That's why realistic training environments like this are so valuable." From across the yard, Marcus caught sight of Diane Patterson standing at her back gate, her face a mask of controlled fury. She'd trapped herself perfectly. Any complaint about the training would make her look like she was opposing public safety. But watching her neighborhood become the backdrop for what was clearly going to be ongoing media attention was obviously killing her. The morning's second scenario involved a child who had fallen into the pool area and was trapped under the deck structure, a situation that required confined space rescue techniques and coordination between multiple agencies. This time, they brought in a paramedic unit and a technical rescue team, turning Marcus's backyard into a full-scale emergency response exercise. Emma appeared at Marcus's side just as the paramedics were loading their victim, a training dummy that looked disturbingly realistic into a backboard. "Dad, this is insane. Mrs. Patterson looks like she's about to have a stroke." "Your concern for Mrs. Patterson's health is noted," Marcus replied, keeping his voice low enough that the news camera couldn't pick it up. "I'm not concerned about her health. I'm concerned about what she's going to do for revenge." Marcus looked at his daughter, surprised by her insight. At 16, Emma had developed her mother's intuition for reading people and situations. "What makes you think she's planning revenge?" "Because she's not the type to take public humiliation quietly. And Dad, this whole thing is definitely public humiliation for her." As if summoned by their conversation, Diane Patterson appeared. At the edge of the training area, clipboard in hand and wearing an expression that could have curdled milk, she approached Chief Rodriguez with the determination of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Chief Rodriguez, I'm Diane Patterson, president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. I need to discuss some concerns about this training." Program Rodriguez turned from his equipment check, giving Diane his full attention. "Mrs. Patterson, nice to meet you. What concerns?" "Well, first, there's the matter of liability. If someone gets injured during these exercises, who's responsible? The HOA, the individual homeowner, the city, ma'am. The fire department carries comprehensive liability insurance for all training operations. The city's legal department has reviewed and approved the program. As for the HOA, you have no liability exposure since this is now classified as a municipal emergency services facility." Diane's jaw tightened. "There's also the issue of neighborhood disruption. The noise, the traffic, the crowds gathering is a residential area, not a training ground. I understand your concerns about quality of life. How many noise complaints has the fire department received in the past year for emergency responses in this neighborhood?" The question caught Diane off guard. I don't know. 43. House fires, medical emergencies, car accidents. We've responded to 43 calls in Willowbrook Heights in the past 12 months. Every one of those responses involved sirens, emergency lighting, multiple vehicles, and crowds of onlookers. The difference is that those were actual emergencies. This is controlled training that improves our response times and capabilities for when the real emergencies happen." Rodriguez's tone remained professional, but his message was clear. Emergency services were part of community life, whether people liked it or not. The choice was between random, chaotic emergency responses and planned educational training exercises. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, community education is a core part of our mission. These exercises teach residents about water safety, emergency preparedness, and how to assist first responders during actual emergencies. The families watching today are learning skills that could save lives. Diane looked around at the crowd of neighbors, clearly calculating whether pressing the argument would make her look reasonable or petty. The presence of the news camera probably factored into her decision to retreat. Of course, Chief, the HOA, supports public safety. We just want to ensure that proper protocols are followed. Absolutely. All protocols are being followed to the letter. In fact, the state fire marshal is considering this program as a model for statewide implementation. You should be proud that Willowbrook Heights is leading the way in community emergency preparedness. As Diane walked away, Marcus caught the expression on her face and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Emma had been right. This wasn't over. If anything, he'd just escalated the conflict to a level where retreat wasn't an option for either side. The morning concluded with a demonstration of water rescue equipment that drew applause from the gathered crowd. Children pressed against their parents, wide-eyed at the sight of professional rescuers in action. Teenagers pulled out phones to record videos that would undoubtedly end up on social media. The elderly residents who remembered when this neighborhood was full of young families seemed genuinely delighted by the return of activity and purpose to their quiet streets. As the fire trucks prepared to leave, Chief Rodriguez pulled Marcus aside. That went even better than I hoped. The recruits got realistic training, the community got valuable education, and we got some excellent media coverage for the department. Any concerns about Mrs. Patterson's questions? Rodriguez chuckled. Marcus, I've been dealing with HOA presidents for over 20 years. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, giving residents barely 24 hours notice. Marcus found the email buried in his spam folder at 6:45 p.m., which meant he arrived at the community center just as Diane Patterson was calling the meeting to order. The room was more crowded than he'd ever seen it. The usual suspects sat in their customary front row. Diane and her inner circle of supporters who treated HOA governance like a blood sport. But tonight, the back rows were filled with neighbors Marcus recognized from the training exercises. Families who'd been drawn into the conflict by curiosity and were staying because of genuine concern. Ladies and gentlemen, Diane began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd never been effectively challenged. We're here tonight to address a serious breach of community standards and safety protocols. Marcus settled into a seat near the back, noting how Diane's allies had positioned themselves strategically throughout the room. This wasn't going to be a discussion, it was going to be an ambush. Mr. Hayes, Diane continued, her gaze finding him in the crowd, has unilaterally transformed our quiet residential neighborhood into a training ground for emergency services without proper consultation or approval from the community. A murmur ran through the room. Marcus could see neighbors glancing back at him, some with curiosity, others with what looked like support. The fire department training program, Diane pressed on, was implemented without HOA approval, without environmental impact assessment, and without consideration for the safety and quality of life of our residents. Richard Patterson, sitting in the second row, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus had heard through neighborhood gossip that the Patterson marriage was showing strain, and tonight Richard looked like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Furthermore, Diane's voice rose slightly. We've discovered that Mr. Hayes has been in contact with multiple media outlets, essentially using our neighborhood as a backdrop for his personal publicity campaign. That was interesting. Marcus hadn't contacted any media outlets beyond returning Channel 7's phone call, which meant Diane had been doing some investigation of her own. Mike Chen, the board treasurer and the closest thing to a voice of reason on the HOA leadership, cleared his throat. Diane, I think we should hear from Mr. Hayes before the time for discussion was before this program was implemented. Diane cut him off. We're here tonight to vote on Resolution 2025-18, which would prohibit commercial, municipal, or quasi-municipal activities on residential properties within the Willowbrook Heights subdivision. She gestured to her secretary, who began distributing copies of a resolution that looked like it had been drafted by someone with serious legal experience. Marcus scanned the document quickly, recognizing the precision of the language and the comprehensive nature of the prohibitions. This wasn't a reaction to the fire department training. This was a nuclear option that had been prepared well in advance, probably triggered by his refusal to simply comply with the pool violation. The resolution, Diane continued, would require immediate cessation of all non-residential activities on private property, with violations subject to fines of $500 per day and potential legal action for breach of community covenants. The room erupted. Voices overlapped as neighbors realized the implications: no home businesses, no charitable activities, no community gatherings that weren't specifically approved by the HOA board. Marcus stood up, his voice cutting through the chaos. Point of order. The room quieted. Diane's face tightened with irritation. Mr. Hayes, this isn't a formal parliamentary procedure. Actually, it is. Your own bylaws require that any proposed changes to community covenants be distributed to all residents at least 72 hours before a vote. This resolution wasn't included in the meeting notice, which means tonight's vote would be invalid. Mike Chen was already pulling out his copy of the HOA bylaws, flipping through pages. He's right, Diane. Article 7, Section 3. Residents have the right to review proposed changes and submit written comments before any vote. The fire department training program represents an immediate safety hazard, according to who? The voice came from the back of the room. Marcus turned to see Chief Rodriguez entering the community center, still in uniform from what was obviously a long day. Sorry, I'm late. I came as soon as I got word about the meeting. Diane's face went through several color changes. Chief Rodriguez, this is a private HOA meeting about a fire department program, which makes it my business. Rodriguez walked to the front of the room with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to taking control of chaotic situations. Mrs. Patterson, I understand you have concerns about our training exercises. Chief, the issue isn't the fire department. The issue is proper procedure and community approval. The procedure is that municipal emergency services operate under state and federal authority, not HOA oversight. We don't need community approval to train our firefighters any more than we need permission to respond to emergencies. Rodriguez turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be crystal clear about something. The training program at Mr. Hayes' property is not a favor to him or a convenience for us. It's a critical component of our emergency preparedness that directly benefits this community. He pulled out a folder and began reading statistics that hit the room like cold water. In the past 5 years, Willowbrook Heights has had 12 water-related emergency calls, 3 drownings, 2 near drownings, 7 water rescues. Our response time to this neighborhood averages 8 minutes, which is 3 minutes longer than optimal for water emergencies. The room had gone completely silent. The training we're conducting at Mr. Hayes' facility has already reduced our response protocols by 90 seconds. That might not sound like much, but in a real emergency involving your child, your spouse, your neighbor, 90 seconds is the difference between life and death. Diane tried to regain control. Chief, no one is questioning the value of emergency preparedness. We're questioning whether a residential neighborhood is the appropriate venue, ma'am. Emergencies don't happen at convenient venues. They happen in residential neighborhoods, in backyard pools, in situations exactly like the ones we're training for. Every exercise we run at that facility makes our crews better prepared to save lives in this community. Rodriguez paused, letting his words sink in. Now, I understand there are people in this room who would prefer not to be inconvenienced by the sight of emergency vehicles or the sound of training exercises. That's unfortunate, because emergencies are inconvenient by nature. The question is whether you'd rather be inconvenienced by training exercises twice a week, or by real emergencies when we're not adequately prepared to handle them. An elderly woman Marcus didn't recognize raised her hand. Chief, how long will the training program continue? Originally, we planned for 3 months, but the state fire marshal has been so impressed with the results that we're looking at extending it indefinitely. We've had inquiries from 6 other fire departments who want to implement similar programs. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. The program was becoming bigger than either he or Diane had anticipated, which meant it was becoming harder to stop. Diane made one last attempt to regain control of the narrative. Chief Rodriguez, surely you understand that proper community relations require consultation, Mrs. Patterson. With all due respect, we consulted with the property owner and the city legal department. That's the extent of consultation required for municipal training operations. Rodriguez gathered his papers and looked around the room. I want to invite everyone here to attend our next training exercise on Thursday morning. See what we're doing, ask questions, understand why this program is so important. Because at the end of the day, we're all on the same side. We all want this community to be as safe as possible. After Rodriguez left, the meeting devolved into chaos. Diane tried to maintain order, but the carefully orchestrated ambush had become a community forum where neighbors were asking questions she couldn't answer. Finally, Mike Chen called for a motion to table the resolution pending proper notice and community review. The motion passed easily, with only Diane and two of her closest allies voting against it. As the meeting broke up, Marcus found himself surrounded by neighbors he'd barely spoken to in years. They thanked him for bringing the training program to the neighborhood, asked questions about future exercises, and shared stories about their own experiences with emergency services. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman from across the street, pulled him aside. Marcus, I want you to know that some of us remember when this neighborhood was about community, not just property values. What you're doing it reminds us of what we used to be. Walking to his car, Marcus felt the satisfaction of a battle well fought, but he also felt the weight of escalation. Diane Patterson had just been publicly humiliated in front of half the neighborhood, and people like her didn't forget that kind of defeat. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you've started. Some fights are worth having. This isn't one of them. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it with, the certified letter arrived on a Friday morning, delivered by a courier who required Marcus's signature and photo identification. The envelope bore the letterhead of Morrison, Klein & Associates, a law firm that specialized in what their website euphemistically called asset recovery and debt resolution. Marcus opened it in his kitchen. Emma, already at school, the house quiet except for the hum of the coffee maker and the distant sound of a neighbor's leaf blower. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. He was being sued for $847,000 in damages related to Sarah's medical care. The papers detailed a complex web of insurance disputes, Medicare reimbursements, and medical liens that had apparently been accumulating interest for 3 years. According to the lawsuit, Marcus had signed personal guarantees for Sarah's treatment that made him liable for costs that insurance had initially covered but later disputed due to improper billing practices by the hospital. His hands shook as he read the timeline. The original insurance payments had been clawed back 18 months ago. The hospital had filed liens against his property. Collection agencies had been assigned to the debt, transferred it, sold it, and transferred it again until it landed with a company that specialized in aggressive collection tactics. And somehow, through it all, Marcus had never received a single notice. The lawsuit claimed that notices had been properly served at his address, that he had failed to respond to multiple collection attempts, and that his continued residence in a high-value property while refusing to address legitimate medical debts constituted fraudulent concealment of assets. Marcus sank into a kitchen chair. The papers scattered across his table like the fragments of his carefully ordered life. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd planned to leave for Emiot could all disappear because of a debt he didn't know existed for medical care that insurance was supposed to have covered. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Jake's number. Marcus, I just got a very interesting phone call from someone claiming to represent your creditors. They wanted to know about your employment, your assets, whether you'd been hiding money from debt collectors. Jake, I need to call you back. No, you need to talk to me right now. What's going on? Are you in financial trouble? Marcus looked at the lawsuit papers spread across his table. I'm about to be. 2 hours later, Marcus sat in the office of attorney David Reeves, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who specialized in medical debt and insurance disputes. Reeves had reviewed the lawsuit with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen every variation of this particular nightmare. This is sophisticated, Reeves said finally. Whoever orchestrated this timing knew exactly what they were doing. What? Do you mean, orchestrated? Marcus's medical debt collection is normally a slow, methodical process. Notices, phone calls, settlement offers collectors want to get paid, not go to court. This lawsuit skipped all of that and went straight to the nuclear option. Reeves pulled out a timeline he'd constructed while reviewing the documents. The original insurance dispute was legitimate. There were billing irregularities at the hospital where Sarah received treatment, but the collection agencies that bought this debt had been sitting on it for almost a year. Then suddenly, 3 weeks ago, they filed suit and immediately moved for asset attachment. 3 weeks ago, Marcus felt sick. Right after the first fire department training exercise, someone with resources and connections lit a fire under this collection process. The timing isn't coincidental. Marcus stared out the window of Reeves's office, watching normal people go about their normal lives. How much danger am I in? Legally, you have defenses. The notice issues alone could invalidate the entire process. But Marcus's lawsuits like this are expensive to fight, even when you're in the right. And while we're fighting, they can freeze your assets, put liens on your property, make your life very difficult. How difficult? They can force the sale of your house. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Lose the house where he and Sarah had planned to grow old together. Lose the neighborhood where Emma had grown up. Lose the pool that had started this entire conflict. There is one option, Reeves continued carefully. The debt buyers who filed this suit are notorious for taking quick settlements. They'd probably accept 60 or 70 cents on the dollar to avoid a lengthy court battle. I don't have 60 cents on the dollar of $847,000. But you have equity in your house. Marcus understood, which was exactly what Diane Patterson had wanted from the beginning. His family gone. The neighborhood preserved for people who could afford to fight legal battles as a form of entertainment. That evening, Marcus sat on his back deck with a beer he wasn't drinking, staring at the pool that had somehow become the center of his life's most important battles. The underwater lights turned the water into a perfect rectangle of blue that reflected the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Emma found him there an hour later, homework finished, sensing with the intuition of a daughterhood. Already lost one parent, that something was terribly wrong. Dad, what's going on? You've been weird all day. Marcus looked at his daughter, 16 years old, Sarah's eyes, his stubborn streak, a future that should have been secure. How would you feel about moving? Moving? Why would we move? He told her about the lawsuit, the medical debt, the choice between fighting a legal battle they might lose or accepting defeat and starting over somewhere else. Emma listened with the serious attention she'd learned to bring to adult conversations since Sarah's death. This is about Mrs. Patterson, isn't it? She said finally. I think so. She can't just sue people for having pools she doesn't like. She can if she finds other reasons to sue them. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Dad, if we lose the house, where would we go? I don't know yet. Somewhere we can afford. Somewhere you can finish high school without worrying about whether we'll be able to pay the bills. What about the fire department training? What happens to that? Marcus hadn't even considered that angle. I guess it ends. They'll have to find another facility, and Mrs. Patterson gets what she wanted. Yeah, she gets what she wanted. Emma stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger that reminded Marcus painfully of Sarah. That's not fair. The training program is helping people. You're helping people. And she's destroying it because she doesn't like that we live here. Fairness doesn't have much to do with legal action, sweetheart. Then we don't play fair either. Marcus looked at his daughter with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, if Mrs. Patterson wants to fight dirty, maybe it's time she learned that other people can fight dirty too. Before Marcus could respond, Emma was pulling out her phone, scrolling through screens with the focused intensity of a generation that had grown up connected to information, networks he barely understood. Dad, how much do you know about Mrs. Patterson's husband's business? I know he works in real estate development. Why? Because I know someone who works at his company. And I know someone else whose mom is a reporter for the Business Journal. And I'm pretty sure that if Mrs. Patterson wants to destroy our family over a pool, we should probably find out whether her family has any vulnerabilities of their own. Marcus stared at his daughter, recognizing something of himself in her calculating expression. Emma, we're not going to Dad. She's trying to take our house. She's trying to force us out of our neighborhood. She's trying to destroy a program that helps the fire department save lives. And she's doing it by weaponizing someone else's medical debt. Emma's voice carried an edge that was equal parts fury and calculation. I don't think this is the time to take the high road. Marcus looked at his daughter, then at the pool, then at the lights of the neighborhood where they'd built their life. 3 years ago, he would have told Emma that taking the high road was always the right choice, that fighting dirty only led to more fighting, that the system would ultimately reward those who played by the rules. 3 years ago, Sarah had still been alive, and the world had seemed like a place where good intentions and hard work were enough to protect the people you loved. What did you have in mind? He heard himself asking. Emma smiled, and for the first time since the lawsuit arrived, Marcus felt like maybe, just maybe, this war wasn't over yet. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, above the fold in the Metro Business Journal, with a headline that sent shockwaves through the real estate development community. Patterson Development under investigation for tax assessment fraud. Marcus read the article 3 times over his morning coffee, marveling at the thoroughness of the reporting. Richard Patterson's company had allegedly been manipulating property assessments for luxury developments, using shell companies and fraudulent appraisals to reduce tax obligations by millions of dollars. The investigation had been triggered by an anonymous tip that included detailed financial records and correspondence between Patterson Development and various municipal officials. The timing was exquisite. The article ran the same day that Marcus' attorney was scheduled to meet with the debt collection company, armed with evidence that the medical debt lawsuit had procedural irregularities that could invalidate the entire case. But now, with Richard Patterson's business imploding in public, Marcus suspected the settlement negotiations would take on a very different tone. His phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Attorney David Reeves sounded almost amused. "Marcus, I just got a very interesting call from Morrison, Klein & Associates. Apparently, their clients are now willing to settle for 30% of the claimed debt, payable over 5 years with no interest. 30%, down from their original demand of full payment plus penalties. Someone is very motivated to make this go away quickly." Marcus looked out his window toward the Patterson house, where he could see unusual activity cars coming and going, people in suits carrying boxers and briefcases. "David, what happens if we just refuse to settle at all? Given the procedural issues I've found, there's a good chance we could get the entire case dismissed. But that would require a lengthy court battle, and right now, the people behind this lawsuit have bigger problems to worry about." Exactly at 10 a.m., Marcus stood in his backyard watching the fire department set up for their weekly training exercise. Today's scenario involved a multi-victim water emergency simulation of what might happen if a party or gathering around a residential pool went wrong. 2 fire trucks, a paramedic unit, and a dozen emergency responders turned his property into a staging area for coordinated rescue operations. Chief Rodriguez approached him as the crews were running through their final equipment checks. "Marcus, I want you to know that the state fire marshal made the program official yesterday. We're getting funding to expand it to 12 other communities across the state. That's incredible news." "It is, but I also want you to know that we heard about your legal troubles. If you need to step back from hosting the training, Chief, I'm not going anywhere. This program is too important." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Good, because I've got some news that might interest you. The state is creating a community emergency preparedness grant program. Properties that host authorized training facilities can receive up to $50,000 annually to offset any costs or impacts." Marcus stared at him. $50,000. It's not charity, Marcus. It's recognition that homeowners who partner with emergency services are providing a valuable public service. The grant covers everything from increased insurance costs to property maintenance to compensation for inconvenience. As the training exercise began, Marcus noticed a larger crowd than usual gathering to watch. The story about Patterson Development had apparently drawn attention to everything connected to the Willowbrook Heights neighborhood, including the innovative fire department program. He counted reporters from 3 different news outlets, plus what looked like officials from other municipalities taking notes and asking questions. The exercise itself was flawless. The emergency crews responded to their simulated multi-victim scenario with precision that spoke to weeks of practice in realistic conditions. When Chief Rodriguez called all clear and began the debrief, the watching crowd broke into spontaneous applause. That's when Marcus saw her. Diane Patterson stood at the edge of her property, still in her robe and slippers, watching the celebration, with an expression of such concentrated fury that it was almost frightening. Her perfectly controlled facade had cracked, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. As the emergency vehicles prepared to leave, Diane walked across the street, toward Marcus with the determined stride of someone who'd reached the end of all other options. "This ends now," she said without preamble. "I'm sorry. The training program, the media circus, the grants, all of it. This ends now." Marcus looked around at the neighbors, who were still gathered, the reporters who were conducting interviews, the fire department officials who were discussing the program's expansion. "Diane, I don't think you understand. This program is bigger than both of us now. It's bigger than the neighborhood." "Nothing is bigger than my neighborhood," she snarled, her voice loud enough that nearby conversations stopped. "I've spent 5 years building this community into something special, something that attracts the right kind of families, and I'm not going to let you destroy it for a publicity stunt." Chief Rodriguez appeared at Marcus's shoulder. "Mrs. Patterson, is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem. The problem is that you people have turned my neighborhood into a training ground without any consideration for the residents who actually live here, ma'am. We've followed all proper procedures. Your procedures don't include ruining families." Diane's voice rose to a shout. "Your procedures don't include destroying marriages and businesses and everything people have worked for." The crowd had gone completely silent. Marcus realized that Diane was having some kind of breakdown, that the stress of the investigation into her husband's business had pushed her past any ability to maintain appearances. "Diane," he said quietly, "maybe you should go home. Don't you dare tell me what to do. Richard's business is finished. Our reputation is destroyed. 20 years of building something, and you've wiped it out in 3 months. I didn't destroy your husband's business. His own choices did that. You think this is over?" Diane's eyes were wild now, her voice carrying across the entire gathering. "You think you've won something? I know about the medical debt, Marcus. I know about the insurance disputes and the collection agencies and the liens on your property." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Marcus felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest, not just because she'd admitted her involvement, but because she'd done it in front of witnesses that included police officers, fire department officials, and news reporters. "Are you saying you were involved in orchestrating that lawsuit?" Chief Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to questioning people under stressful circumstances. Diane realized her mistake immediately. Her face went pale, then flushed red. No, I'm saying that financial troubles are public record, and maybe people should consider their obligations before taking on expensive community programs. But it was too late. The damage was done, the admission made, the connection established. Between her HOA campaign and the suddenly appeared medical debt lawsuit, Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 had been recording everything on her phone. "Mrs. Patterson, are you alleging that someone manipulated debt collection processes to target a neighbor over a property dispute?" "I'm not alleging anything. I'm just saying that actions have consequences." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "Diane, you're right. Actions do have consequences. Your actions led to an investigation that exposed fraud in your husband's business. Your actions led to a fire department training program that's now being implemented statewide. Your actions led to this neighborhood being featured in news stories about innovative community partnerships." He paused, looking around at the faces, surrounding them neighbors, officials, reporters, emergency responders. "But most importantly, your actions showed everyone here what happens when someone tries to use fear, intimidation, and legal manipulation to get what they want from people who are just trying to live their lives and contribute to their community." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of applause, first from Chief Rodriguez, then from the gathered fire department personnel, then from neighbors who'd been watching the conflict unfold for months. Diane Patterson looked around at the faces surrounding her, realizing that she'd lost not just this battle, but any credibility or authority she'd once had in the community. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her house, leaving behind a neighborhood that would never look at HOA power the same way again. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same spot, watching the same fire department conduct training exercises in the pool that had started it all. But now there were differences. Official signs marking the property as a state emergency services training facility, a small pavilion where community members could observe exercises safely. and a plaque dedicating the program to Sarah Hayes and all the emergency responders who risked their lives to protect others. The medical debt lawsuit had been dismissed with prejudice after an investigation revealed irregularities in the collection process. Patterson Development had declared bankruptcy, and Richard Patterson was facing criminal charges for tax fraud. Diane Patterson had